I had a very similar experience. My first ever comic book was when Spider-Man and Batman met. And so you had Venom and Carnage. And so like I was in those shoes for a second. I was like, oh yeah. And then I was in this cool dark comic book store. I felt like it was the most metal thing ever. It wasn't quite a liquor store with a spinner rack, but it was a comic book store. And the way you go about it, I love that you also are very cognizant to tell people like, hey, you know, DC, Marvel, they have all these echoes of these characters and the artists, and they are all like swiping from left to right. Yeah. And you can be very honest and say like, hey, but this one, you know, this story is the one that resonated with me more. Like Justice League came first, but then Marvel's version is the one that like everyone came out with. It wasn't the Avengers, but you know, and you know, talking about Hyperion was like really, really cool.
Well, I appreciate that. Look, man, like it's where I live and breathe. And the reason it's warm and fuzzy is because I have never lost that inner kid. And those memories are powerful. Look, I'm going to tell you something I haven't said in the podcast yet, but my family knows it. And even my friends used to test me on it. I can tell you what time of day, where, when I bought every single comic book I have ever bought. That's awesome. When I'm going through my back issue and I see an annual that I bought on a road trip with my family on our way to New Mexico, there is a rush. It is that wave of memory that's activated. And one of the, it's funny, I won't name his name, but there's a peer who told me several years ago that I was only celebrating my comics of my youth because it was just pure nostalgia and everybody loves what they had as a kid. And I'm like, well, that aside, I believe there's an aspect of that that's true with everyone. But as I've tried to make a point with this podcast is I was fortunate enough, you don't control when you're born. No. But Frank Miller, George Perez, John Byrne, Walt Simonson, we're living in their world still. The last X-Men movie was a John Byrne story. The 3 seasons of Netflix Daredevil was a Batman story. I mean, I'm sorry, a Daredevil story by Frank Miller. The 300 movies are a product of what Frank started in Daredevil. The Christopher Nolan and the Zack Snyder depictions of Batman are Frank Miller. This guy is as relevant, maybe more so now than he was when I was inhaling his work in 1979, 1980, 1981, when he was taking a bi-monthly book that was almost canceled to Marvel's bestseller. And so that's not nostalgia, you know? And the Walt Simonson version of Thor, we're still waiting for Beta Ray Bill. Beta Ray Bill smashed that logo in 1983. And Lost World, I mean Dark World, which is not a great movie, but Malekith and the entire plot is Walt Simonson.
Open it up. Yeah.
I mean, Ragnarok is tons of Walt Simonson, the executioner with machine guns, and they're making my childhood into the films.